Anthropic just wrote the biggest check in AI history to make a lawsuit go away, $1.5 billion, and they physically fed 2 million scanned books into a shredder to close it out, which works out to about $750 per book. And that number is now the reference price every AI vendor's lawyer is baking into your next renewal quote. Your ChatGPT bill, your Claude bill, your Gemini bill, all of them. I'm Stewart, I run an AI operator channel for entrepreneurs. Today, the settlement that just set the market price for scraped training data. Google quietly retiring the visible AI watermark it spent 2 years defending. Claude now watermarking every file it writes to satisfy EU rules. And the one thing nobody is telling you about the metadata riding inside your AI output right now. The last story is the one that hits your P&L in 90 days, and almost nobody is talking about it. Story 1. The class action was brought by authors whose books were scanned into Anthropic's training corpus without permission. Anthropic could have just deleted the digital files. OpenAI and Meta lawyers argued for exactly that in their own cases. Anthropic did more than that. They physically destroyed the source material, which sounds theatrical until you realize what it actually does legally. Deleting a file is a promise. Shredding the scanned book is a receipt. The court gets a chain of custody video, the plaintiffs get a per work damages figure on the public record, and Anthropic gets to draw a bright line under everything before this date. The math the whole industry cares about is right there. $1.5 billion divided by 2 million. $750 a work. Here is the headline answer, because this is the part that hits your invoice. Every AI vendor with a scraped corpus, and that is all of them, now has a number their finance team can plug into a risk model. Per-seat SaaS pricing absorbs risk through the contract renewal window. The seat you renew this quarter locks the rate before the pass-through hits. The seat you renew next year does not. Before I go further, if you want the vendor-by-vendor breakdown of how this settlement routes into your subscription line, I run a free school community called the Church of SEO Jesus. Every checklist, every renewal lock script, every prompt from these videos lives inside. Free to join, link is in the description and pinned comment. Subscribe while you are here, stick around because the strongest proof of this whole story lands in the next 30 seconds. The demo, I fed Claude the headline figures, $1.5 billion divided by 2 million. It returned $750 per destroyed book. Every AI legal team is now writing that number into next year's budget. $750 a work times a scraped corpus of a few million works is the ceiling plaintiffs firms are going to point at when they sue OpenAI over its books corpus, Meta over LibGen, and Google over YouTube transcripts. And here is where I get careful. I also asked Claude to name the vendor that paid $1.5 billion in August 2026 to destroy 2 million books. It refused, then it corrected me. Anthropic's real settlement was announced September 2025 over pirated books, and the model would not vouch for the physical destruction claim. The $1.5 billion is confirmed. The book destruction number is media narrative until you see the court video yourself. Story 2. Google just did something that should shock you if you were paying attention to their last 2 years of policy. Yesterday, Google shipped a toggle across Gemini, Nano Banana, Omni, and Lyria that lets you turn off the visible watermark on any AI-generated image or video. For 2 years, Google was the loudest voice in the room, saying AI content had to be visibly marked. Their researchers wrote white papers. Their policy team briefed regulators. Their PR called it a duty of care. As of this morning, settings, media watermark, toggle off, done. What actually happened? Paying creative pros hated the visible mark because it made their output look unprofessional next to a Midjourney or a Sora render that shipped clean. Google was watching paying customers churn. Here is what did not change. The invisible SynthID watermark is still baked into every pixel. The C2PA metadata is still written into every file header. Anyone with a free detection library can still tell the file was made by Gemini. Google is also open sourcing a library called Credentio, so any developer can validate those credentials locally inside their own app. The platform your file lands on can check it and flag it, and you never see the check happen. The visible watermark went away. The invisible flag inside your file just got easier for platforms to read. Here is what I actually think happened. Google looked at the settlement math from story 1 and decided visible mark friction was costing them more paying users than invisible metadata was costing them in reputational risk. The compliance layer moved from the pixel to the file header quietly on a Thursday. Any Gemini image exported today goes out without the corner watermark. The file itself is still telling anyone who bothers to check. Story 3. Here is the one that lands on any laptop running Claude. Anthropic just added watermarks to text and files generated by Claude to comply with EU regulations, not images, text. Every draft, every memo, every proposal generated with Claude and exported as a file carries a metadata flag that says this was written by an AI. A bookkeeper's vendor email, a freelancer's blog post, a pitch deck sent yesterday. If it left Claude as an actual file, a docx, a PDF, an MD, the file itself is now discoverable. Users are already angry about it, not because they are doing anything wrong, because the file is proof of a workflow they never asked to disclose. The recipient does not need to run a detector. The file volunteers. Here is the operator translation. The EU rule triggering this is real, and every US vendor is going to match it within 2 quarters. Because building a separate non-watermarked pipeline for one market is not economically rational. By end of Q4, ChatGPT Enterprise Output and Gemini Enterprise Output carry the same flag. It is not a Claude problem, it is a preview. And the 3-year settlement pass-through window I mentioned in story 1 closes at roughly the same time the watermark standard becomes ubiquitous. Your renewal cycle and your metadata cycle are about to line up. Which brings US to the last story, and this is the one nobody is naming out loud. Story 4. The metadata layer that just showed up in these files does not vanish when you copy the text. It vanishes only when you strip it, and almost nobody is stripping it. Open your last file exported from Gemini or Claude right now. Right-click Properties Details tab. Look for a producer field, a C2PA credential, or a SynthID marker. That is the proof, not me telling you. I ran the audit myself on camera. I asked Claude to draft a 5-step audit anyone can run this week on Windows to inspect AI-generated files for C2PA credentials and SynthID watermarks. It handed me an inventory command, a metadata reader, a diff step, a strip step, and a documentation step. Real commands, ready to paste. It is the checklist I am posting inside the Church of SEO Jesus this afternoon. Then I tested the escape hatch. I asked whether a plain text export of the same content leaks anything. I generated a draft blog post, saved it as a plain text file called demo.txt, and scanned it for C2PA, SynthID, and XMP origin markers. Result on screen, none. Plain text carries no embedded AI marker. The metadata lives in the file wrapper, not the words. If a file needs to leave clean, export it as raw text, and rebuild the formatting in whatever you are shipping to. If you email a Claude-generated PDF, you email the metadata with it. The watermark is not in the writing, it is in the envelope. And the settlement figure I opened with is the reason every vendor is adding the envelope in the first place. $750 a work, times a scraped corpus, is a number lawyers can attach to a subpoena. Watermarks are how vendors prove they cleaned up after. The next question is which vendor breaks first on pricing. My money is on the enterprise tiers at OpenAI. Their books corpus is the closest structural match to what Anthropic just settled, and the price change they announced last quarter, the 12% one, already had headroom for exactly this. The follow-up ships tomorrow. 2 actions before you close this tab. Renewals coming up in the next 90 days, lock them at today's rate. Files leaving your machine this week, export as text or strip the metadata. Both moves are free, and both stop being possible once vendors update their standard contracts, which starts happening in October. See you tomorrow.